Leela's trembling hands held the metal box that would expose the truth her mother spent years hiding. Willow Creek was a quiet town where everyone knew each other, which made the changes in little Leela's behavior stand out even more. She had always been a gentle child who liked drawing, collecting flowers, and watching birds outside her window. But over the last few weeks, something shifted in her routine. She began staying unusually close to adults she trusted, especially at preschool, and she often froze when someone mentioned home. Her teachers noticed the way she watched the door, as if waiting for something she couldn't explain. She started arriving at school with her small backpack packed full, nearly too heavy for her tiny shoulders. The teachers expected toys or snacks, but what Leela carried were strange items that never seemed to belong to a child: old keys, bits of paper, and photographs that looked worn at the edges. No one understood why she had them or why she held the backpack so tightly every time someone tried to help her. Children often behave in unusual ways, but there was something different about Leela. She didn't act angry or upset. Instead, she seemed quietly frightened, as if she knew something the adults didn't. She had developed new habits too, like checking beneath tables or pausing before entering a room, waiting for a moment as though she expected something to appear. Her actions weren't loud or dramatic, but they carried a weight that made the adults around her uneasy. Meanwhile, her mother, Mara, had changed as well. She had once been friendly, always giving neighbors a kind smile. Now she barely made eye contact. She rushed inside her house as soon as she arrived home from work, locking the door behind her. The curtains stayed closed even during daylight hours, and the porch light remained on during nights when no one visited. Neighbors whispered that Mara seemed to be watching the street more than usual, sometimes standing still by the window long after midnight. Leela's unusual backpack and Mara's growing secrecy created a quiet tension around the house. No one could point to anything specific, yet something about the atmosphere felt wrong. Some neighbors brushed it off as stress, while others felt an unsettling chill whenever they passed by. Leela, with her innocent movements and fearful glances, seemed to be carrying a secret far too heavy for a child her age. And though she never said a word, her actions suggested she was desperately trying to show the world something hidden deep inside her home, something that had already begun to change her life in ways no one understood yet. The discovery inside Leela's backpack stayed on the social worker's mind long after she left the school that day. The photographs were old and faded, showing unfamiliar places and people who seemed connected by something she couldn't identify. The metal box was even stranger. It was scratched, dented, and clearly handled many times. The folded paper inside carried faint markings that looked like part of a map, though most of it had been smudged over time. None of it made sense for a 4-year-old to have, especially one who barely understood what she was carrying. The social worker filed a report, noting every detail. Even though Leela had not explained where the items came from, her tight grip on the box suggested she believed it was important. The report quickly made its way to the local authorities, who decided that a welfare check was necessary. They didn't expect anything dramatic. Most checks led to nothing urgent, but something about the objects raised concern. They were too organized, too carefully preserved, as if kept for a purpose. When officers arrived at Mara's home, the atmosphere inside felt tense. The house was neatly arranged, almost too neat, with surfaces wiped clean and personal items stored away. Leela stood silently in the hallway, watching the officers with wide eyes that held a mix of curiosity and fear. Her backpack sat on the floor beside her, half open, as if she had been interrupted while sorting through its contents. The officers walked through each room, noting the locked drawers, the closed-off basement, and the uneasy air that hung over the place. There were no signs of danger, no clear violations, nothing they could use to intervene. But the house carried a silence that felt unnatural, as though it was holding its breath along with the people inside. Even the walls seemed to echo with a tension they couldn't define. After a long inspection, the officers had no choice but to leave. They left behind a home that appeared normal on the surface, but felt deeply unsettled beneath it. The only evidence of something unusual remained in Leela's small backpack, filled with mysterious items that seemed carefully selected and hidden by someone older than her. The welfare check solved nothing. Instead, it raised more questions. Why did Leela carry those objects? Why did Mara act so guarded? And what story were the worn photographs and metal box silently trying to reveal? The strange discovery marked the beginning of a puzzle that would soon pull the entire town into a mystery far darker than anyone imagined. The strange noises reported by the neighbor came at a time when the town was already uneasy about Mara's behavior. The neighbor described the sounds as heavy thuds, scraping across the floor, and something shifting repeatedly in the middle of the night. They were loud enough to wake her from sleep, yet steady enough to suggest purpose rather than an accident. By morning, everything went silent, leaving the neighbor with a growing sense of dread she couldn't ignore. When officers returned the next day, the house looked strangely still. The curtains were closed, and the front door stood slightly open, swaying with the breeze. Inside, the air felt heavy, as if holding onto something that had just happened. Mara was gone, but Leela sat quietly in the living room, holding the same metal box from her backpack. Her tiny hands were wrapped around it as though it was the only thing she trusted. The officers approached carefully. The box was open this time, revealing more clippings than before, newspaper fragments about a missing person case from several years back. The pieces were old but neatly folded, showing signs of someone who had studied them many times. The name mentioned in the articles was unfamiliar to the officers, but the tone of the reports made it clear the case had once been important in a nearby community. As the officers searched the rest of the house again, one of them noticed the wooden floor in the living room had a section that didn't match the rest. The boards were slightly lighter in color and placed in a way that looked forced. When they knelt down and inspected it more closely, they found tiny scratches along the edges, as if someone had recently pulled them up and put them back. With careful effort, they removed the boards and uncovered a shallow hidden space. Inside were more items: a set of old keys, a torn ID card, several folded notes, and personal belongings that clearly belonged to an adult. Everything seemed connected to the same missing person mentioned in the clippings. Nothing inside the hidden space looked randomly placed. Each item appeared chosen for a reason only the person who hid them would understand. It became obvious that this secret spot had been there for a long time, concealed from everyone except Mara. The officers realized the late-night noises the neighbor heard were likely the sound of those boards being opened and closed again. Leela's quiet presence and the objects she carried painted a clear picture. She had unknowingly begun revealing pieces of a story her mother had spent years trying to bury. The secret hidden beneath the floorboards was no longer silent. It had finally been found, and it was only the beginning of uncovering the truth. Investigators worked through the night, sorting the objects found under the floorboards and comparing them with old records. Each item seemed to pull them deeper into a history that Mara had tried to erase. When they checked her background, they found a surprising detail. Years earlier, she had lived under a different name in a town only an hour away, the same town connected to the missing person case. From the newspaper clippings, she had left suddenly, without forwarding addresses, explanations, or contact with anyone she once knew. The detectives followed this trail and uncovered more pieces of her past. She had rented a small apartment in that town, worked a temporary job, and barely interacted with neighbors. Then, shortly after the missing person disappeared, she vanished as well. There were no records of her activities during that time, as if she had intentionally removed herself from every traceable route. The timeline aligned perfectly to ignore. Back in Willow Creek, child specialists began gently observing Leela. She didn't speak much, but she showed behaviors that matched the patterns of a child living with constant fear. She often looked around a room before entering, sat close to walls instead of open spaces, and clutched objects that gave her a sense of security. When she pointed to simple drawings or made gestures, the specialists noticed patterns, small details of movement and routine that hinted at a home life built on secrecy. Investigators pieced together these observations. Leela's actions suggested she had seen things she couldn't fully explain. She remembered her mother hiding objects, pacing late at night, and checking doors repeatedly. She had watched her mother pack and unpack the same items, always treating them with urgency. The way Leela guarded the metal box made it clear the child believed the contents were important, even if she didn't understand why. The detectives also learned that Mara had refused to form close bonds in Willow Creek. She kept interactions brief, avoided gatherings, and declined friendly invitations. She lived as though someone might find her at any moment. Her caution wasn't the kind that came from worry, it was the kind that came from long-term fear. All these pieces formed a troubling picture. Mara's past wasn't simply complicated. It was tied to a long-forgotten case that had left a hole in another community. And now, because of Leela's innocent actions, the truth was pushing its way to the surface. The deeper the investigators looked, the clearer it became that Mara had lived with a secret capable of changing everything. Whether she was protecting herself, hiding from someone else, or concealing something far darker was a question the next steps of the investigation would finally confront. Authorities followed the trail that led them out of Willow Creek and into the quiet outskirts of a nearby forest. The abandoned cabin they found there looked untouched from the outside, but the footprints in the dirt revealed someone had recently entered. When officers stepped inside, they discovered clear signs of a person living in hiding: an unmade bed, a half-empty water bottle, and stacks of old papers spread across a small table. Everything suggested someone had left in a hurry, as though they sensed the investigation closing in. Mara was found not far from the cabin, sitting beside a narrow stream that ran through the woods. She didn't try to run or resist. Instead, she appeared exhausted, as if she had spent years carrying a weight too heavy to bear any longer. The officers brought her back for questioning, and soon the full story began to surface through evidence, old records, and the items she had hidden for so long. Investigators discovered that Mara had been connected to the missing person case, but not in the way many expected. Years earlier, she had been present during the crime, but fear prevented her from reporting what she witnessed. The real perpetrator had threatened her, convincing her that speaking out would bring danger not only to herself, but to anyone close to her. Terrified and alone, Mara chose to disappear instead of coming forward. She changed her identity, moved from town to town, and kept every piece of evidence she had collected, hoping she could one day use it safely. But fear controlled her life. She believed that revealing the truth would draw attention to her whereabouts, which might lead the perpetrator to find her again. When she became a mother, her fear grew even stronger. She built her world around hiding, believing it was the only way to protect Leela. Her secrecy became a routine, and her constant anxiety shaped every part of her life. The biggest twist came when investigators verified portions of her story. The hidden items, untouched evidence, and details she provided matched parts of the original case that had never been made public. While she had not spoken for years, she had preserved crucial information that reopened the investigation. It became clear she carried both guilt and fear: not guilt for causing harm, but for staying silent. Leela's innocent actions finally broke the silence. Without realizing it, she revealed the pieces her mother had tried to keep buried. The metal box, the clippings, and the hidden space beneath the floorboards became the key to bringing clarity to a case long believed unsolvable. In the end, the truth emerged not because an adult decided to speak, but because a child unknowingly revealed what had been hidden for far too long. The weight of the past finally came into the light, allowing the case to move forward and letting a small town understand the secret that had shaped a family's life in silence.